The philosophy of prayer that we will discuss today is based on a thinker that we were introduced to 2 weeks ago, briefly through Stan Solomon. Spiritual davener, social activist, Rav Avraham Weiss. Tell you Are you hearing me? You're hearing me though.
Now.
Weiss will tell you openly that he has lovingly struggled with prayer. Not because he doesn't embrace it, he does. Not because he doesn't love it, he does. And though exhilarating, Weiss asserts it is the most daunting, and I quote him, of spiritual experiences. Daunting because of its paradoxes. Tefillah, prayer, is a time for self-assertion, but also for self-submission. It demands structure, but calls out for heartfelt feelings, which aren't always there. And how do I know that I'm even being heard? Or is that not crucial? I'm going to share screen. I'd like you to help me complete this sentence. Tefillah, prayer, is intended to be an experience of, don't think too much, just say what comes to your mind.
Comfort.
Okay.
Emotion.
Emotion.
Introspection.
Okay. Yes.
Spirituality.
Yes. Anyone else?
Appreciation, gratefulness.
Yes.
Connection.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'm willing to guess that connection.
Community.
Okay. Okay. Absolutely.
Belief.
Ah. Okay. Notice when I said a moment ago, we can't even be sure that our prayers are really being heard, but maybe that's not so crucial. What did I mean by that? Especially when we just said Tehillim. There are different views. When we say a prayer for someone who is ill, we would like to believe that the prayer is being heard and that it will be answered positively. But we know that all too often doesn't happen. But there's something else about, even if it's not being heard. Think of it. When you ask someone, either the person who is ill or a relative of the person who is ill, for his or her name, And you ask that, and they know that you're asking that because you're going to include them in your tefillah, in a mishaberach. That in itself does two things. It is, we're told, helpful to the patient, uplifts them a little. And of course, to those of us who feel so desperately helpless, it gives us something to do, a way to show our caring. Prayer, Avi Weiss would also say, is meant to be an expansive, far-reaching experience, not a narrow experience. Now, what does he mean by that? I think many think that prayer is a wonderful time for leaving the rat race, leaving our mundane behavior, whether it's for a few hours, whether it's for a few minutes, but it's separating us from reality. With his holistic approach, Avi Weiss is really going to say he sees in tefillah, the thrust of it is actually meeting the world through tefillah. Let's begin with looking at text number 1. This is a tradition that certainly existed in the time of the Talmud, and I'm willing to bet that there are still some who do this. The pious of old used to wait an hour before praying. They'd come into the shul, they'd sit down an hour before tefillah was going to start. And why did they do that? In order to prepare themselves to focus their thoughts upon God. In other words, they would come in the morning knowing that when they leave the Beit Tefillah, they have a business meeting, or they're going to write an exam, or they have to open the store, they have to go to court, and they were meant to leave that behind so that they could concentrate totally on their prayers. Now, there's something to be said about that. But Weiss will tell you that he sees more benefit in prayer when it impacts upon our behaviors in the real world. And so when he uses the word holistic, it's a play on the word holy, that we should be in the presence and aware of God, whether it's in tefillah or whether it's in any other activity of ours. But then he goes on to say in text 2a, optimal tefillah is holistic. Holistic tefillah means synthesizing the whole of the human being, heart, mind, soul, and body in service of God. Now, as I read those words, heart, mind, soul, and body, you can envision certain symbols that we have throughout the year that bring to mind these parts of the body. Anybody?
Heart.
Sukkot, we talk of the lulav, the different parts of it uniting as the body. And we need each of those parts. What else? Tefillin, that you put one of the batim on the head and the other close to your heart, on the arm, and various others like this. We go down to text 2b. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. In the Shema, it's probably even more familiar to us in the Hebrew. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavcha u'v'chol nafshecha u'v'chol miodecha. That is a holistic pattern. Our entire body is meant to serve God. Now we move on to another holistic pattern. And this is said, not in every shul, but in many, at the very beginning, and it's usually in very small print, said at the start of the morning, behold, I accept upon myself the commandment of love your fellow as yourself. Hareini mekabel alai mitzvat aseh shel v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Now, we just said that we're about to start speaking with God. Tefillah, mitzvah, bein adam lamakom. Why do we start with this statement? Which is a statement reminding us that we, throughout the day, are going to be concerned with how we treat other people. Why? I'm about to put the world aside, talk to God, and yet I'm beginning by reminding myself of my behavior with other human beings. Why? Anybody?
I would just say that, can you hear me?
I hear you.
Okay, I would just say that there's no relevance to the one-on-one between myself and God if I don't know how to be a mensch.
Exactly. And to echo that succinct but true sentence, and perhaps you've heard me say this before, some of you. I said not every shul says this. Going back to the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin, alav shalom. That's how many years ago? 25, 6? Well, if you remember, that was a Saturday night. And I remember, actually, the person who just spoke, Nechama, calling, and my parents, Aleim Shalom, were in Toronto at the time, and her telling us what had just happened. And then she exacerbates things by telling us that Rabin was murdered by a fellow Jew. And that fellow Jew, somebody who prays 3 times a day. This is Saturday night. When we get to school on Monday morning, a few of us look at each other and feel there is no way we can just begin the day as if nothing has happened. And it was at that point that we began saying this line every morning at Tefillah in school. Driving home, that connection that Nechama just made. You can't split your devotion to God and expect that he's going to approve of how you treat his other children. Just as a parent, the sign, something that makes parents feel so good is love between their children. That's the way it is with God as well. And Rabbi Weiss goes on to say, Prayer then begins by reaching in to tap into our inner godliness. And this involves, a couple of you said this, contemplation of who we can become and our responsibility to work on ourselves to become that person. There are so many reminders in the tefillah of actions we are meant to emulate. And then the second movement is reaching up toward God Himself, which makes us realize we are connected and responsible to a being far greater than we. And we'd like to believe that believing in that greater being should have vitally important impact on us. And the third movement is reaching out to unite with our fellow person, Selim Elohim, image of God, establishes our relationship and our responsibility toward others. These three themes are fundamental motifs of prayer. Now, traditionally, we associate Shachrit, Mincha, and Mariv or Arvit, our three services per day, with our patriarchs. We say that Avram is responsible. We find the basis for Shachrit with Avram, and the afternoon prayers, Mincha, with Yitzchak, and the evening prayer with Yaakov. And let's take a look at this because I think it is fascinating. I call it prayer, personality, and personalizing. And I want you to think which service most reflects you. So if we look at Avram, the pasuk, the verse says, Vayashkem Avraham baboker el makom asher amad sham et pnei Adonai. So Abraham rose early in the morning and went to the place where he had previously stood, amad, before God. So this is rather clear. He gets up in the morning and he goes somewhere, and the word amad is meant to stand for, just as the Amidah, for the prayer that he offered. Now, what is the significance of amad? And in English, standing. Why is it so appropriate? And you'll see in a few minutes why I think this is so important. Why is it appropriate that Avraham be the one who is responsible for the morning prayers, Shachrit? Think of the kinds of things he did. He was an innovator. He was a trailblazer. So he had to be what we call a morning person. It's all metaphoric. And the Amad reflects Avram's character as well. He stood up for a new idea. And when else did he stand up for something?
He stood up for others.
He stood up for others, and in which particular group where it took a lot of guts on his part to stand up for them?
When angels came after his circumcision.
Sodom and Gomorrah.
Yeah.
Sodom and Gomorrah. Yes, after the Brit, I'm sure it took a lot of guts on his part to stand up, but I don't think that's what you meant. That he was willing to stand up to God for justice. for justice. Now, when we look at Yitzchak going out toward evening to meditate in the field, Isaac looked up and saw camels coming. Now, in the Hebrew, Vayetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh lifnot erev, that he went out, and it's clear that it's still afternoon. Now, the Hebrew lasuach from sikha, meditation, is a good translation here, because what it is, it's sikha is a kind of dialogue that's very contemplative, and rather than initiating something, we know that of Isaac. He was a passive character. Think of different situations he was in. He's taken to be sacrificed. His wife is chosen for him. He redug wells that his father Abraham had originally dug. And so for him, the afternoon, being outside, praying, that's appropriate. That's what's felt. And the third, Jacob, Yaakov, encountering a certain place, he, Jacob, passed the night there, for the sun was setting. Taking one of the stones of the place, he made it his head rest as he lay down in that place. Now, that word encountering is very often used in the Tanakh when somebody is going to be praying, especially when they're meeting an enemy. Now, Vayifka means encountering, but you could have used any other number of words, Hebrew words, to say encountering. The word that's used is Vayifka. It's a kind of sudden bumping into something, perhaps because it's dark, but it's a surprise. Now let's remember, Jacob was hated. He was separated from his parents for so many years. His beloved Rachel dies young. His favorite son disappears. It's appropriate, the rabbis felt, that Jacob, so down, would be somebody who would be overcome by fear. And that is a feeling that many have when it's night, when it's dark. Now, what is the point of these psukim and talking about this? Weiss believes that the only way tefillah is certainly going to be meaningful is if a person customizes it to himself. Now, this is an interesting thought, and it goes back to one of his paradoxes. So, is Abraham, the morning person, just meant to pray in the morning? Should Jacob be allowed to just pray when he's afraid? And should Yitzchak just pray in the afternoon? On the one hand, what Weiss tries to say in his book called Holistic Prayer is that a person's character has to be reflected in his act of prayer. You have to fully be yourself, or it's not your prayer. Now, of course, that brings up other issues, because we know that, first of all, we have 3 set times to pray. So in other words, we're told we don't go for just spontaneity. That's good, but if we left it up to when I feel like praying, many, and even very observant, would not get to pray because it's hard. You're not always in the mood for a variety of reasons. So these are things that have to be worked out. But he brings this analysis in order to make this point. Now, another reason, what would be another reason that all of us, even if we're not feeling it, or if this isn't the real me, should be involved with all three times of prayer? Give me a very practical reason.
Help make a minion for other people.
Exactly. I'm not just doing this for myself. Others are depending on me. Now, there is a value way beyond just talking with God. Prayer, as Weiss says, is so far reaching, impacts on so many realms of living. Now, Weiss goes on to say, I don't want to just look at Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, but I want people today also to personalize their tefillot. And he says in 6, prayer requires not only reading and translating. You know, it was felt a long time ago that if you translated from the Hebrew into English or Spanish or French, that would solve all the problems. No. So he says prayer requires not only reading and translating, but personalizing. That is, relating the text to one's personal life with the goal of transforming tefillah into a spiritual experience. And he gives 3 examples. So we know that before the Shema, we say the Bracha, Yotzer HaMarot. Blessed are you, Lord, who forms the radiant lights. He suggests, relate to God, perpetual creator of our world, and meditate on a moment when you felt the presence of God through a powerful nature experience. Has anybody been outside lately? Think of a time. Think of a time that you've been somewhere.
I have to say,
Go ahead.
I had a very emotional experience when I was on the Maid of the Mist and under Niagara Falls. And, you know, just feeling the nature of the falls, I just felt very close to Hashem at that time. And I felt it was important to bring all my kids to have that kind of an experience.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Oftentimes, can you hear me?
Yes, Helen.
Oh, okay. Oftentimes, when I see a magnificent sunset, I'm in absolute awe. I've on occasion even stopped the car and just sat there and thought about the magnificence and the awesomeness of it,
Mm-hmm.
and connection to God and his creations.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
I also
Somebody?
Sunrise at the hotel, to go before the sun comes up, to Devon as the sun is coming up is a magnificent experience.
Okay.
And I have experienced it when any one of my children have become parents, and I look at that baby, and that to me is just a miracle.
Absolutely.
I had an experience, Bracha, in Ottawa. Recently, I was driving home with my wife, and it had been raining, and the sun was just going down, and I looked ahead on the road. I was trying to look at the road, but there was a double rainbow in the sky, a double rainbow, and it was pink. The whole sky was pink. So the rainbows, the two of them, didn't just go from red to blue, they was all pinkish. And I had to stop. I pulled over and I was trying to remember what's the bracha for this, but I took some pictures. I said, I don't know what's the blessing about Sha'asak.
But you know what?
I don't know what I didn't know what the blessing was for a rainbow, but
But you could have made up your own.
I kind of made up my own. It was just the pictures didn't compare with the reality, but you can imagine.
Yeah. Thank you.
I yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes. I hear you, Linda.
I go for a walk every day, and I say to myself, this is how I pray. I look at the trees, I look at the grass, I look at the flowers, and it's kind of awesome. And I go in different paths, different ravines or neighborhoods, and yeah, that's how I pray, actually.
Okay. Rabbi Weiss, in his book, reminded me of a story I had heard a while ago. A modern day commentator, Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, was known to have shocked his community of students when one day he said to them he's going on vacation. And that was very strange for him to do. And they said, why? And he said, when I get to heaven, and it's probably not that far off, he was older, when God asks me if I saw the Alps, I want to be able to say yes. And that always stuck with him, that there has got to be a connection. You know, people react and appreciate a beautiful sight, a wonderful symphony in different ways. You can have an artist decides to paint it, a photographer that Joel wanted to do, to take the picture, to sing. And all of those ways are wonderful ways. But Weiss will say, though, holistic, but direct each of those to God, who is the force behind all of them. Now, goes on, thank you for your examples, to a second time that we should personalize. Blessed are you who choose his people Israel with love. Habocher ba'amo Yisrael bi'ahava. Relate to Torah study and God of revelation, and imagine a particular moment when you felt God through the study of Torah. Now that's very interesting. You just gave examples of feeling God outside or in a delivery room, or I don't know if Simone, you've been in the delivery room with them, but close by. Do you feel God through the study of Torah? And when? When do you feel that you're not just reading this ancient text, but that God is really talking to you? Does anyone feel that?
I think sometimes when we're reading the text, and it's also reflecting what's happening today, because the text, continues, like each time we read something, there's quite often a comparative to what we're experiencing today. And I think, the untimeliness that it just timeless. It's just timeless. So much of what we read and learn.
Yes, thank you. Somebody else wanted to say something.
Yeah, it's Joel again.
Yes, Joel.
Sometimes reading the Torah from the scroll, which is somehow in a congregation, is more powerful and for me than just reading the text, from a chumash. Although there's sometimes moments of insight. I have a memory at Beth Tikva when it was my mother's, Aleh Shalom Betty Ann. It was her 85th birthday or 80th, I don't remember, maybe 85 or something. And we wanted to make a special party for her, and she wanted it at Beth Tikva. That was the only thing she wanted. So I said, maybe I could read Torah. And we asked Mom, when would you want it around her birthday? And she picked a week when she could come and when it was good for others. It happened to be Kedoshim, my favorite parsha. And then I asked Irv, give me any Torah reading, that would be appropriate. And is there any way you can invite a woman, my mother, for an Aliyah? He said, oh, we allow that now. I said, oh, really? So Mom had maybe her first Aliyah. And the Aliyah he gave me, which just happened, the Zoe, it had all my favorite psukim, and it had something about honor the elderly also was in that little reading. There was so much in that reading that was so powerful for that moment, for my mother and for me and for Beth Tikva. I felt that we were all connected, and Hashem was there too.
Beautiful story. Beautiful story.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Third example, and you know that Weiss is talking about God as creator, God as revealer, and now God as redeemer. This is right before the Amidah. Blessed are you who redeemed Israel, Ga'al Yisrael. And Weiss suggests, relate to the God of redemption and think of a redemptive moment. So how many of us have experienced a redemptive moment? You know that on Pesach, we are supposed to feel that we, not as if, but we went out of Egypt. But that's a long, long time ago. Think of redemptive moments now. Please God, when we're allowed to really leave our homes, that will be a time to say Ga'al Israel. What about other times? Have you been in a situation where you feel finally you can say, I'm free? I know what I just thought of, but I'm not going to say it out loud. Okay? Anybody? But the point is that this is double-sided. What you're doing is making each of these three moments special by connecting it to God, but you're also taking these holy words and making them meaningful. And that's essential in Weiss's theory. Now we're going to move on.
I have kind of an example, but
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I don't want to dominate. It's when I was 20 years old, I was in Israel for a year, and it happened to be 1967, 68.
So wait a minute. You are, okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, 73. Anyways, being at the Kotel, this was 1967, and just going to see the Kotel and saying prayers. I didn't think of this at the time. I was overwhelmed, as many of us were, but there was a sense of, here's the Kotel, and it's some kind of connection to Hashem and the temple. And here we are in the land of Israel today. And after 2,000 years, we are here. I can be here. Everyone is welcome here. It's very powerful.
Absolutely.
Bracha.
I think somebody needs to mute themselves, please. Okay, Marlene?
I told you this story, I think, during our class yesterday about, and it's something that not only I, but Rona and some of the others experienced when we were in Israel just prior to the first Gulf War. And everybody in Israel was talking about the drought, but we were taken to the airport in the middle of the night to greet a group of Russian Olim. And as it happened, a group of Ethiopians were coming in right behind. And to me, the redemptive part of it was redemption for the Russian Olim, but for the Ethiopians who were coming from a drought-filled land to Israel on a plane, which to them must have seemed like a magic carpet, and arrived in Israel to see the end of the drought with a complete and utter downpour, which was soaking everybody through, to me had to be a sign to them of a miracle and of redemption.
Absolutely, a beautiful story. Even hearing it a second time within 24 hours, really. You should write that up somehow. Yeah. Okay. And Isaiah Horowitz, who's known also by Shalach HaKadosh, his famous writing, says the following to sum this section up in text number 8. When knowledge of God is only through tradition and not through my personal grasping, when it is only the experience of the God of my Father, he is above and beyond me and the inner recesses of my heart and distant from him. Very, very important that it be personal. You know, we say, when we say in the Amidah, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu, we say the God of our fathers, and then we go on to explicitly say the names of each of them. I would, at this moment, I'm just thinking this, so we don't just leave it at in general, but we say he was the God of Avram and Sarah, etc., etc. Maybe fit in there. I don't know, our own name, but you understand the point. Now I'd like to go on to yet another holism, and that is, again, reminding us of the interfacing of the body and the soul. And this is so clearly reflected in two brachot, two tefillot that follow each other. And maybe you're familiar with this. Asher Yatzar. And some people actually have this tefillah hanging outside, you'll forgive me, their washroom. And you'll see why in a moment. Blessed are you, God, our God, sovereign of the universe, who formed humans with wisdom and created within him many openings and many hollows. It is obvious in the presence of your glorious throne that if one of them were ruptured or if one of them were blocked, it would be impossible to exist and stand in your presence. Blessed are you, God, who heals all flesh and performs wonders. Now, if that's not being absolutely down to earth, I don't know what is. And I have heard the older people get, the more they come to appreciate this tefillah. So it's certainly saying, of course, our bodies are important. And then it is followed by Elohai Neshama. My God, the soul you have given me is pure. You created it, you formed it, and you breathed it into me. And you guard it while it is within me. And so we see that there's this dialectic between the importance of the body and the soul, and one will not truly survive without the other. Now, we hear this tefillah in shul regularly. Many parents will recite it for their children on a Friday night. And Weiss refers to this tefillah as one that really captures the essence of human beings. It's a tefillah that says, I really know what you're like. And let's really understand it. The Lord bless you and keep you. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. The rabbis tell us that what it's referring to there is, may you have money. May you have money. Then, though, it goes on, knowing that money often corrupts, it goes on to say, the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. In other words, if God shows you the light, and for the rabbis, the light is referring to Torah study, then that will prevent you from becoming corrupt. But then, when you feel you are too knowledgeable, that often leads to arrogance. And therefore, it says, don't be arrogant, but let it be knowledge that is gracious to you. And then finally, the Lord lift up his face to you. We pray that God will face us. So then why does it end and give you peace? Weiss asks. Why doesn't it just stay and let God face us? Which means he'll be on our good side. He'll protect us. Why does it have to add on, give you peace? It really knows what goes on in our world today, that too many have, in the name of God, in the name of religion, brought and carried out evil. And so it's saying, don't think when God is on your side that you can do whatever you want, but hopefully shalom will come about. And that's how things should end. So Weiss brings this again in trying to say that the composers of our tefillot were really indicating that they know the nature of human beings. And tefillah, as much as it is an opportunity to sing and to be inside, away from the outside world, it is equally a way of recognizing what a person, what people, what communities are like, and let the words of our Siddur impact and give us guidance when we are out there. In text number 12, Weiss quotes Eliezer Berkovitz, the author of his very famous book, God, Man, and History. And there are often people who feel, why, when we're praying, do we need to move a certain way, to bow? Why these bodily movements? Doesn't it take away from our spirituality? And listen to what Berkovitz says. And again, it's an interfacing of the body and our soul. Physical prostration before God is no less essential for prayer than is spiritual concentration. The prayer of man should be human, not angelic. Contrary to Kant, who limits service of God to the invisible, to the heart, Judaism teaches that man's true service of God must be human. It should be invisible, as man's soul is invisible, and it should be visible too, because man is visible. It must be service of the heart, in spirit and in truth, as well as of body. It must be service through the mitzvah, the deed in which man's spiritual and material nature have unified. It is a much higher service than that of the spirit alone. We are meant to apply the words, as my sister said much earlier, to our actions. To our actions. And Rav
Bracha, question?
Yes, please.
I find it on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur when we do the prostration.
Yes.
That can be very powerful. That's the word. I was searching for the word. It's a powerful, almost transformative experience compared to what we normally do. Aleinu, we bend, bow the knee, we bend over a little bit. Here, going right down is so powerful. And I see in Islam, I don't know their prayers, but they do that multiple times in each of their 5 prayer services. I wonder why Judaism, why that got banned, because it takes away that power of that, of the experience, of the prayer experience.
Just quickly, one of the reasons is precisely for what you just said, that other peoples who were doing that to idols. And so the rabbis did not want there to be any appearance of that maybe we were doing that. But perhaps at another time, why certain movements and not. But there's also something to be said about leaving certain movements for once a year. You do have on a weekly basis the tachanun, which you'll see people bowing their head down onto their arm. And that can also be powerful. But absolutely. And the stepping up, when you take the 3 steps, kadosh, 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 all are meant to enhance and to heighten the experience, because as Weiss has said, it is all interconnected. And in 13, in holistic tefillah, a movement is neither inward, nor upward, nor outward, but circular, embracing all directions simultaneously. And that is how we should approach life. And
And Bracha,
yes,
that sums up Avi Weiss,
absolutely.
right? That's how he's living his life.
Well, that's what I called him, the spiritual davener and the social activist.
Yes.
And nothing remains confined in the synagogue for him. Everything that goes on there is meant to impact outside. And in fact, for him, the ultimate is living in what he calls Beit Elohim, the house of God, which is not limited to 3080 Bayview Avenue. Is that
And
the right
his
word? Yes.
30 and his definition of open orthodoxy fits right into that.
Absolutely. If
Yes.
you remember, Stan, I think, mentioned that 2 weeks ago. He's
Yes.
responsible in Riverdale, New York, of having initiated the first Maharat learning institution for women. Yep, absolutely. And he has sometimes, like Rav Kook, had people upset with him.
Very upset. The Rabbinical Assembly in New York, I don't think is very happy to this day with Rabbi Weiss.
All right, let them concentrate on other more important, more necessary issues. And that's that. Okay. All right. So everybody
Yes, so thank you very much.
be well. Be well and take care.
Thank you.
Thanks,
too.
Bracha. That was wonderful.
Wonderful
Rabbi.
experience.
You know, I just want to add one more thing. When Simone mentioned her grandchildren, so in one of my Sidurim, and I think it's actually a Koran, but it has a commentary also of Lord Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, but they talk to an obstetrician and they ask him, don't you get bored day after day, delivery? And he says, if we only knew that each birth is such a miracle.
So true. So true.
Absolutely.
So true.
On that thought, let's be optimistic toward life.
Amen.
Hopeful.
Amen.
Oh, man.